You can change your entire life by just changing one habit. Subscribe to our podcast and make listening a habit.
Change your mindset, manifest your dream life, and live magically with Rise and Align.
Raising the frequency one episode at a time.
Everything is always working out for us.
Hello, and welcome back to the Rise and Align podcast, where we talk about all things high vibrational. We are your hosts. My name is Haley.
And I'm Demi. And today we're going to explore where psychological insight meets emotional awareness with special guest Zoey Charif, author of Love Can, in Fact, Be Calculated. Thank you so much for being here. We are so excited to talk to you.
Well, first and foremost, thank you so much for having me on your show. So, my name is Zoe. I'm the author of Love Can, in Fact, Be Calculated. And I'm especially excited to share it with you because the book is highly analytical, very much psychology based. There's a lot of evolutionary psychology in there as well, and sociology and how we relate to each other and how we measure compatibility. But with that said, there is such a strong and powerful spiritual element to it. And yeah, I'm just really excited to share it with you because I do feel that it's a holistic approach to finding a match and also understanding how you're showing up in relationships and whether you're meeting your own standards, right?
Absolutely. I'm really so excited and appreciative that you are combining both like logic and emotion because I love to back things up with logic and be like, here's XYZ reason why you feel this way, and here's how we change it. So I am really excited for you to speak on this topic.
Yeah.
I would love to hear a little bit about what inspired this book and, a little bit about what research you have done to create this.
So, what inspired this book? Um, I was dating someone about 18 years ago, 18, 20 years ago. And at the time, I was studying criminology. So I was very deep into the human psyche, into sociology, and all of that. And at the time, I was actually cheated on by someone that I was madly in love with. And I didn't get it. I didn't understand it. It was such a shock to the system. So my mind immediately went into, I need to understand this. I need to understand what drives love, right? But beyond what drives love, why do people fall out of love? And also, why do we betray each other? Why can't we just love each other? I know it sounds so naive, but truly that one sentence, why can't we just love each other, has such complex undertones. So yeah, I started researching online, just trying to understand once again what drives love. And there was this one article I came across, and it said, you can't fall in love with someone unless they're a match. And I didn't quite I mean, I understood what they meant to say, but I think I took it a step further. And I was like, okay, well, how would you even measure a match? So then I figured, well, why not calculate a match? So how do you calculate a match? So the first version of what I call the love formula in the book is an assessment of values and how you score yourself against these values. And then also your partner, how your partner scores against your values. Okay. So let's assume values means standards. Okay. So a standard can be, hey, I have a standard for family and how I interact with my family and closeness to family. I may have a standard for fashion. If that can be a value, why not, right? I may have a standard for communication, right? So what we found from the analytics is that all age groups, all genders tend to have different types of values. But so from that first iteration of just evaluating values, I then realized that, of course, love goes deeper, right? It's not just based on standards, there's emotions in there as well. So, of course, I had to extend that to, okay, what about trait preferences, right? How do you score trait preferences? So the theory went through a few iterations before I found the formula that exactly reflects how to find a match, how to keep a match, and how to make sure that you yourself are scoring yourself highly so that you approach relationships in a healthy way and with self-confidence.
The math isn't mathing for me because you said 18 years ago you were studying, and I'm like, that's weird because you're about 25. So it's really
I'll
weird.
take the
Um,
compliment.
but
Thank you. I'll take
no,
it.
this it makes a lot of sense, because I think especially young people really just go off their feelings. Like, I'm physically attracted to this person. I'm really excited about them. That must mean I'm in love. But as we get older, we realize there's so much more to it. And you can have these really deep emotions and not be compatible. So I'm curious, what do you think specifically
Yeah.
like makes people compatible?
Yeah, thank you so much for asking me that question. So I actually used to be that way as well. In fact, in the formula, there's one part of the calculation that evaluates whether you're more values focused or traits focused. If you tend to be more values focused, that means that you approach relationships in a pragmatic way. If you tend to be more traits focused, that means that you tend to approach relationships in an emotional way. What we found in our surveys is that the majority of people do, in fact, approach relationships in an emotional way. Those tend to be the relationships that make it to the long haul, right? So they tend to be more long-term relationships. With that said, so imagine there's a scale, right? And the scale goes, you've got the practical side and the emotional side, okay? On either ends, you'll have extremes, okay? So what that means is the four categories that we found were the healthy practical, the extreme practical, so the ones who were way too values focused. We found the healthy emotional. These ones tended to keep their relationships nice and healthy and alive. And then we have the extreme emotional. And guess what? The extreme emotionals were not able to hold down relationships based on our surveys. Okay. Or at least it was a lot less likely. So I, in the past, fell into the extreme emotional type like personality type. What that means is I was not looking at relationships practically or pragmatically. And I was so like, oh my God, it must be meant to be. We must be soulmates. And all of a sudden I'm thinking, this must be a soulmate runner chaser dynamic. And I'm finding all these things online that are validating my extreme emotions that should have been checked and should have been kind of reasoned with, right? So, yeah, to answer that question, the book absolutely, or the framework absolutely addresses what happens when you're too emotional. When you're too emotional and you're not evaluating whether the person meets your values and your standards, you're not likely going to hold on to that relationship. Beyond that, you may fall into a pattern of infatuation and you may fall into a pattern of self-sacrificing. So, self-sacrificing and infatuation, these are two distortions that I talk about. And that's essentially in the self-sacrificer distortion, you view your person as this grand human. And what ends up happening is rather than approaching the relationship with self-confidence, with self-respect, right, which is attractive, it's absolutely attractive to respect yourself and to show up in that way. If you show up in a way that is sadly insecure, that will look into neediness, jealousy, and then you're putting this person up on a pedestal. And in the meantime, you're telling yourself it's okay, it's a runner chaser dynamic, and eventually they'll come around. It's like, no, no, we need to snap out of that. It's spirituality. I'm a highly spiritual person. I believe in energy. I believe in past lives. I believe in meant to be's. I believe in soul contracts, right? But sometimes I think we fantasize things that are distorted in our minds. The goal of a relationship is not to be so overly in love that you can't focus on work or that you're um forgetting your other priorities such as family and friends. That's not the goal. The goal is to first and foremost be happy, and then hopefully your partnership will make you happier. But if you're relying on them to make you happy in the first place, and you'll be unhappy without them, that's a big red flag. Work on yourself, work on your own standards. What is your self score? So I know that I talked about the formula a tad bit earlier, but when I say self score, so imagine I have five top values, okay? Family, career, purpose, and then two more. Okay, for each one of those, I'm going to rate myself. And then I'm going to tally up all those numbers, and that will give me my final self score. The research shows that for women, if we rate ourselves below 76%, we are below the average for self confidence. If we rate ourselves above 76, we tend to be higher average, we tend to have good self confidence. Okay. If you're anywhere below 70% or 65%, you are not likely going to show up in a healthy way in a relationship. You need to work on yourself or ask yourself whether those values that you have are productive values. If your main values are image, money, um, social status or whatever, yeah, you're going to shoot yourself in the foot. Those are not the types of values that will necessarily make a relationship go the long haul. Your first one should be dependability and reliability. You want a rock in your life. And if it's not your top five, you should ask yourself why. And if it's not in your top five, that means that you're probably not showing up as a rock. And if you're not showing up as a rock, you will not be trusted in a relationship.
That's really wonderful advice. And I can say from experience, I've also been there, where I've put somebody on a pedestal and I've chased that high and I've, gone through that cycle of the chaser energy and it just
Mhm.
gets worse. Wow, it will blow up. So I
Mm.
love that you're sharing this advice. I've definitely, had to work through that myself and I've helped other people work through that. And it's amazing to see how much your choosing of partners will change after you've done that self-development work. And you said you are still very spiritual and emotional. I'm curious, do you believe in soulmates?
I do, actually. I do. With that said, I believe that soulmates, there's usually a soul contract there. So I don't know necessarily that a soulmate is someone you're meant to be with. I think that it's a mirror for what you need to work on yourself. So I believe that us as humans, right, the body is a vessel
Mhm.
and our souls are inside this vessel. I believe that there is soul recognition between two people. And I believe that the goal of life is to be a better person, be kinder to yourself, be kinder to the world. And I think that we're constantly put in these situations in life where hopefully the lesson is to just be kinder to yourself and kinder to other people. That lesson will not always get picked up. Sometimes it takes five or 10 times, right? But hopefully by the end, that's what the goal is, right? So I feel that soul contracts and soulmates are here to remind you to just show up in a self-loving way. Or, like I said, to make sure that you're not putting out harm out there, right? Soul mates will not always make you feel love, right? And if they do make you feel love, it's just so they have that influence over you so that when they do make you feel bad, there's more of an impact so that it really does something to your brain where it's like, oh my God, something feels off. Because if you didn't care about the person, then the lesson would not be learned. It would not be impactful, right? So I do believe in soulmates. Do I believe that the goal is for sure to be with them intimately? No, I do not, right? I believe that soulmates can be your parents, they can be your siblings. I don't believe that they necessarily need to be of the opposite sex or whatever sex you're interested in, right? But with that said, I'm sure you, yeah, with that said, I would say that they tend to be the most impactful because love is the strongest emotion, most influential emotion. So if you're in love and someone happens to put a mirror and say, "Hey, look at what you're doing," you're more likely to hear that, in my opinion.
That was so wonderfully said. I love that perspective, and I feel like I have a similar perspective on soulmates, and I like that it's
Mhm.
not just like necessarily an intimate thing. Like your
Yeah,
friend can be a soulmate, your parent can be a soulmate. I really love that.
absolutely.
And I also just love that based on what you're saying, and we talk about this too, is that like we're at the school of life. Like life is here to teach us different things, and different people have different purposes in reflecting what you need to learn going forward. And yeah,
Hmm.
that was just so
Hmm.
wonderfully said.
Thank you. Thank you so much. I'm glad it resonated.
I was also thinking when you're talking about the scale of, and there's like the extremes, do you
Hmm.
feel that people tend to land on those extremes based on like their upbringing or societal conditioning? Like, does that impact where people land on that scale?
Yeah. So that's a great question. I can tell you what my hunch is, but
Mhm.
whatever I tell you right now is not validated by our research. We
Okay.
didn't look into that in terms of what influences the emotions, the strong emotions, but I would think that trauma is probably one of them. So, of course, trauma, you develop abandonment wounds, right? What that means is when you love something, you love it so much and so tightly because you don't want to lose it and you can't fathom losing it, right? Also, there's something to be said for the chase and the dopamine high. The extreme emotionals tend to need that fix, right? So they can be highly sexual. They can be very, like they can have their vices outside of relationships, right? But I think that usually the pattern kind of shows itself, right? And I think that's where obsession can come in. Obsession. And honestly, like I know that earlier you mentioned, being in the chaser dynamic. I truly believe that this is something that's very human across the board, right? I think what may differentiate some from others is rationalizing it. So the rationalization of, oh, if I love this person so much, and if I'm falling into this obsession, if like whatever, it's like they assume that it's that specific person and they assume that something really meaningful must be there for them to have such powerful emotions, right? So that would absolutely be a red flag. And in fact, there's a video on my Instagram where I talk about the infatuation distortion and about how much of a red flag it is to think that another human is that grand and deserves all your emotions and deserves all your thoughts. And we need to snap out of any type of God wanted it. My angels are guiding this, right? Your angels don't want you to be unhappy. Your angels don't want you to self-harm. Your angels don't want you to be addicted, right?
Mhm.
Your angels want you to feel stable and to feel safe. That's what I believe. And if you keep on falling into patterns and relationships that are highly toxic, highly obsessive, then you're likely doing yourself a disservice. And it's likely not a sign from God that this situation is for you. And if it is, if there's a reason why you fell in that, it's probably because there's a lesson to pick up there. And that lesson is probably love yourself and like get yourself out and snap out of it.
Yeah, I 100% agree with that. Yeah, most
Yeah,
definitely. I'm loving this. And I love that you have done the research. So this isn't coming just from like a personal opinion, but like you have reasoning and facts and evidence to support this.
absolutely.
So what do you think are like aspects or traits that make people like the most compatible? Or how do we know that somebody is the right person for us?
Yeah, okay, so thank you for asking that. Um, so first you pick your top five values. You give yourself a rating. So let's say you give yourself 80%, and that's a combination of uh finance, career, and whatever else, right? Purpose. Purpose tends to be a big one. Okay. And then you give your partner also a score for your top five values. Okay, now let's say you're 80% and your partner is 85%. Okay, that tends to be a really good match for a lifestyle and respecting each other and being on the same page about just how you approach life, right? Now, there's a secondary component to this. You have to evaluate whether they are attractive to you, right? Now, values can shift throughout your life. Attraction and trait preferences also can shift throughout your life. Okay. So you would pick your top five. And for women, naturally, the number one that kept on coming up was always humor, right? Because apparently we love to laugh, right? For men, not shockingly, physical appearance was like number one pretty much across all age groups. But anyway, so you would pick the top five trait preferences that you are typically drawn to. Okay. Here's the nuance. You're not picking trait preferences that you want. You're picking trait preferences that you've historically been attracted to, where you have a pattern of just being drawn.
Mhm.
If that means emotional unavailability, if that means controlling behaviors, if that means just something that's destructive, but that's inherent to that person, you have to put it in your traits because that gives you a true evaluation of whether you'll be attracted to the person, right? And also, it's good for you to self-reflect because if you have a pattern of falling into relationships where that's the thing that is the common denominator, let's say emotional unavailability, that's something that should probably be looked into, reflected on, and then eventually healed when you're ready for it, right? So going back to the calculation, you have 80, partner or potential partner has 85 for values. Okay, this is a really good, very close match. Okay, now you're evaluating his trait preferences or her trait preferences, right? Whatever your preferences. But let's assume the trait preferences here are 75. They score 75. So your trait preferences might be humor, it might be intelligence, it might be physical appearance, right? It could be extrovertedness, alpha, dominant, whatever it may be, right? If they have a 75, you will average out both of those scores. Okay, so that means that the average between 85 for values, 75 for traits is 80. We are now looking at a very exact match. This is a relationship that will likely go the long haul. Okay, now let's look at a couple nuances here. Number one nuance, based on our surveys, you are more likely to stay in a relationship if they are on average 4% higher than you.
Hmm.
You are likely going to be unsure of them and be in an on and off relationship if they're 5% less than you. If it's not a match, okay? So if you are willing to date them, but it's probably not going to go the long haul, we are looking at about a 15% discrepancy, 1-5. So that means that you'd be willing to try a couple dates with a 15% discrepancy, but in the end, if you don't close that gap, it's not going to work. So talking about closing that gap, everything is based on perception. There is no such thing as truth when it comes to this formula. You can go ahead and pick your values. You can shift your values. You can go ahead and pick your trait preferences, and you can do some inner healing to pick some better trait preferences if the ones that you have are not conducive to a healthy relationship, right? Beyond that, even in relationships, you can shift around. Like when my husband and I, when we first met, I think he was 5% above me, right? Which is a really good sign. As the relationship progressed, we both got lazy towards each other. And there were shifts in numbers. And at one point, I think at the lowest, when we were very rocky, I think that there was a 1-5% discrepancy, 15%. And here is where I'm like, hey, if we don't talk about this and we don't adjust how we are showing up in this relationship, we're going to lose this relationship. And thank God based on this framework, we managed to not be so lazy and remind each other, hey, like this is not the time just because we're married,
Mhm.
right? To get lazy about how we treat each other and being good partners to each other. So now I feel like the scores have rebalanced, which is so positive, right? And thank God for that. But it definitely so even within one relationship, you can go through your little swings. where it's super healthy, super happy, and then not so great, but then you can bring it back,
Hmm.
right?
Thank you so much for sharing that. That's so
Yeah,
valuable. I
yeah.
I just love your perspective on this. One question that I do have is how would someone or can they apply this when they're dating and like not long term, but they're like just meeting someone? Can you apply
Hmm.
this like right away, or is this something that you would do as you got to know someone a little bit deeper?
Yeah. Actually, you absolutely can apply it right away. The only thing is that that number and the scores will likely change in the months following.
Mhm.
Even with my husband. So the first time we did the formula together was 6 months in. But what actually happened was when I first met him, he didn't even know I was doing this book, right? I didn't tell him, I think it'll freak him out. But I assessed him based on values. And even though the chemistry had not been instant, because he had such a high score for values, I told myself, Zoe, just wait. And because I used to have pretty crappy not values, but trait preferences that were not necessarily conducive to healthy relationships, I'm like, maybe I should, base it on my current list, and this list needs healing, truly, right? So I waited, and I told myself the values is still working. We are in alignment. Let's just wait and see if the chemistry builds, the attraction builds. And it did. So by our second month, we were cracking up together, right? And then there are certain things that I used to think I was attracted to. So just to be candid with you guys, I used to be more into, like I'm Afghan, right? So someone more culturally like in line because we speak the same language and it's very similar humor. And there's a comfort and familiarity there too. So I thought that that was a trait preference that I needed, right? So Kevin is white, right? Born and raised in SoCal, right? So when I first met him, initially it's like this person is not my type. Like I've never dated this profile. But because I told myself, Zoe, the profile that you used to date was not necessarily, it didn't necessarily work. Why not open your mind? Right? So that's why I'm like, let me just hold off. Let me not jump into conclusions whether I'm attracted or not attracted, right? Or that this person is not my type. And then eventually, like I said, the chemistry grew so much. He became my best friend. He still makes me laugh so much, right? And I'm so glad that I waited and that I did that inner healing and I stepped outside of my own box and my own comfort zone. Because if I hadn't done that, I would have let go of my lobster. Yeah.
I love this process. I feel like it kind of it's naturally going to encourage you to learn more about yourself and kind of make decisions better by knowing yourself better, which I think
Hmm.
is so important. Do you
Hmm.
feel like when you're working through the formula, how
Hmm.
do you think that works with like the law of attraction? Do you think that that helps people align themselves so that they are more likely to attract a partner that's more aligned with them?
So there is a huge spiritual element to this that I don't talk about. So okay, and let me give you a background story. Before I met Kevin, my husband, I was going through a pretty bad breakup. Okay. My self-esteem was like an all-time low, right? I wasn't working. I was just not showing up as the person that I thought I could be, right? Like I was just, yeah, I wasn't doing great. I did the formula and I realized my self score was really low. And I'm like, oh boy. Okay. So do you know what I did? On the background of my phone, I put 90% in gold, right? That was my goal. I wanted to have a self score of 90%. So two things happened here. One, when opportunities were coming to me and falling on my lap, I'm like, yep, yep. So it validated I'm gonna reach the 90%, right? Second, I sincerely believe that I was putting out a signal to the cosmos, to my angels, like, hey, these are my values. This is where I'm at. That's where I want to be. Here, 90%. So both things happened. A, I got gifts from the universe. B, I already had it in my subconscious that I am the 90%. Therefore, I deserve to receive gifts that match 90%. right? So two ways here. It manifested in two ways, both subconsciously and energetically, right? So yes, 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 huge, huge, huge spiritual element to this. The universe loves it when you're specific. The universe loves it when you've got that laser sharp light, the narrow, like, this is what I want. This is, at the end of the day, an affirmation. This is an affirmation. When you say, here's my self score, and I want someone to meet my standard, and why not? Let's give it 4 or 5% plus because I want to feel like I'm admiring my partner. Yeah, just keep putting that into the universe, and the universe will give that to you. But again, first and foremost, it's so important that you work on your self score because if the universe gives you the gift of someone who's a 90%, can you be a 90% for that 90%? Because if you're assuming that you're 70%, you're going to turn that 90% partner into someone who feels like they constantly have to reassure you and who feels like they constantly have to be there for you and to make you happy and to make sure that, so work on yourself, right? And that cliche, you can't love anyone else until you love yourself. Like, such a cliche, but it's so true. And literally, the numbers show it. The numbers show it. You need to have, sorry, if it's okay, I'm gonna add one more like nuance here that is so important.
Hmm.
Beyond having a match of self scores to make a relationship work, they have to be a match of high self scores. You need to have high self-esteem match with someone that you respect equally. You can have a match of low self-scores. What is going to happen? If you think you're a 50 out of 100 and you attract someone who you think is a 50 out of 100 and they also might have a lot of self-esteem issues, what is going to happen? This is what I call a red zone versus green zone. The red zone is when you have a match of low scores. That, yeah, it'll be a match, but it won't be healthy. You guys will probably have a lot of ups and downs, but you're gonna think that, oh yeah, like there's no one else out there better for me. You might fall into attachment issues, right? But at the end of the day, it'll be so toxic. When you're in the green zone, that's when you have a high self-score and you equally respect your partner, and they also need to respect themselves. Otherwise, they're not going to show up well in the relationship. There's a middle ground as well. That's what I call the yellow zone. Okay, the yellow zone is where the self-sacrificing happens. This is where the infatuation distortion happens. This is where one person thinks they're here and they've put the other person on a pedestal. That won't work. That won't work. That you're gonna fall into situations where you might be jealous, you might be needy, you're not in your right mind, you think you absolutely need them to be happy, which is not good, right? Yeah, I hope that answered the question. I kind of went on a
Yeah.
tangent.
No, absolutely. I love it. Do you find, or has it been shown that people in the yellow zone can move together up into the green zone? Like if
A
they're putting
hundred
the effort
percent,
in, and
100%. That ha happened to my husband and I.
that's
So there
awesome.
was a time where sometimes it was yellow, like I was not showing up well enough. And then other times it was yellow in the sense where I felt like Kevin was not showing up well enough, right? So it absolutely like varies, right? If the yellow is right from the get-go, and it's not addressed right away, it's not going to go the long haul, right? So we have history clearly. So when we went into yellow zone, we were married, right? So clearly we're not going to quit, right? And we're going to work on it, right? And we did eventually. So we went through our phases. Again, it's very normal in marriage, right? But yeah, absolutely. The goal is not to stay in yellow. The goal is not to stay in red. And also, once you're in green, don't assume you'll stay there.
Mm.
That's a work as well.
Definitely a practice. How do you
Mhm.
recommend closing that gap if you two start to kind of the gap grows? How do you fix that?
That's a really good question. Thanks. So first and foremost, doing the formula is really important. So what that means is lay out your standards. So you know how some people talk about their love languages to articulate what they need from their partner, right? This is just another way of articulating what you need from your partner, except that it's a numerical approach, right? So the way you would close that gap is, Kevin, honey, love you so much, right? Or Zoe, baby, I love you so much. Started very calmly. This is not a tool to bully each other. And, and then you list out here are my values. Okay. Here's where we stood a year ago. This is why you were hitting 90% a year ago. My values have not shifted, right? They're still the same values. But now I feel like in this particular category, I feel like there's a bit of laziness or a lack of care, right? And you can do that for one category or all five. So when you do these numerical assessments, first identifying your values and then doing the numerical assessments, right? It's a way to articulate to your partner, can you please step up? Because I want to love you and I want us to have a healthy relationship. But if you don't meet me here, I'm gonna check out. And then when I check out, you're gonna feel like I'm not meeting you on your values because I'm gonna get lazy, right? So yes, you can absolutely close the gap. That is the goal of this as well. It's not just to identify if someone's a good partner, it's also to keep yourselves at high uh two people with high self scores, i.e., like high self-confidence that show up for each other and are each other's rocks, right? And yeah. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, definitely. Um,
Yeah.
Earlier, I really liked when you were talking about how he wasn't necessarily your type in the beginning, but he
Hmm.
had the values that you were now valuing. I
Hmm.
have gone through that sort of process of changing what I valued in relationships.
Hmm.
And I find that, especially at first, it can be kind of challenging to find somebody who you are excited about and attracted to, and who simultaneously has those values that you now want.
Hmm.
Do you have
Hmm.
any advice on that? Like, do you think, I mean, for you, you said you just gave it more time.
Hmm.
How do you know how much time to give it?
Yeah, great question. So, one thing we found is that the majority of people fall into the emotional type, not the practical type. That means that the majority of people will um, emphasize the need for the emotional attraction before the pragmatism. Okay. But the key question is, are you a healthy emotional or are you an extreme emotional? If you're an extreme emotional, that means that you're completely bypassing the practical aspects of it. If you're a healthy emotional, that means that there's a good balance, right? So for me, I knew that I did not have fair and healthy trait preferences. And because I have been through enough relationships, and because that relationship before Kevin was awful, I started to self-reflect and I started to realize, Zoe, you're doing a lot of self-damage. You totally saw the red flag. There was no reason to get yourself in this situation and for it to have gone this bad, right? So for me, it was very much a moment of self-awareness and choosing, making a conscious decision to tap out of my own crap, right? Because my crap was putting me in very detrimental situations. And guys, like, thank you so much for earlier saying that the math wasn't mathing. But the truth is, I'm turning 39 this year. Okay. At some point, your soul starts to feel it hard. At some point, you get really tired of your own bullshit,
Mm-hmm.
right? And you should, right? So I think that's where I started to think, okay, the attraction is not there. I'm not falling into this like, oh my God, magnetic, like I cannot live without you. It wasn't that. It was safe. And that was a different type of like relief. It
Yeah.
wasn't the dopamine release. It was the type of release where I can come into work and focus on work. It was the type of release of I can lay my head on the pillow and fall asleep. It was a type of release where it's like I don't need to constantly be checking my phone if someone texted me or not. right? So I think it was a different type. It was a different type of release, right? So for those who, first of all, I'm not against emotions. I think emotions are very healthy, and the surveys validated that you need emotions, right, to be in a long-term relationship. It's very human,
Mhm.
right? With that said, it's not letting yourself fall into an emotional roller coaster and to very much acknowledge those values and whether someone fits your values. The only reason I was in the beginning willing to bypass emotions was because I knew I needed to heal, right? And I knew that I was making bad decisions. So I just waited and then it worked out.
That was such a wonderful answer, and I so agree with the concept of safety and
Hmm.
being calm. When I was younger, it was definitely the is he texting and like a anxious excitement versus
Hmm.
a calm safety, and it is so different. It really is.
Hmm. Yeah. And calm safety doesn't mean boring. Like you can
Mm-mm.
still laugh together. You can still do joyous things and activities. Like I think there's a misconception that calm, like where your nervous system is not on edge all the time, means boring.
Mm-hmm.
And if you feel that way, then yeah, that's a sign that, something needs to be healed.
Yes. So we've talked a lot about like the extreme emotional. Would you go a little bit more into the extreme practical, what that might look like in relationships?
An extreme practical is someone who has a vision in mind and will do whatever they can relationship wise to hit that vision. Let's assume there's a 25-year-old woman who just wants to be taken care of for the rest of her life. Okay. That means that she has a vision in mind. She knows exactly where she wants to be at 40. She knows that she wants to have all the material wealth, that she may want kids, she may, whatever it may be, right? And there is no flexibility, and that is unbending, right? An unbending vision. So what might happen is she is now telling herself that the only way to do that is to partner with someone who's extremely rich. Okay? So she is now willing to bypass all emotion, all love to find that one person that she's able to influence to the point of reaching that vision. That is who I call an extreme practical, where like they may have emotions, but that's not how they're approaching relationships. Okay. What will happen if that man someday loses his job and cannot provide for her? He's out. That is the extreme practical. Emotionals tend to be more loyal, right? So another example, let's say a guy um has the dream of owning a house, right, by the time he's 40 and has a very strict, like, this is what's happening, right? House, two kids, I want X amount in my bank, right? So I'm just giving you practical examples, right? So what might happen is in college, you meet someone who's in law school and he thinks this person will will fit my vision and will allow me to get to that vision. Okay. Now let's assume this person gets her or his law degree. Okay, the partner gets their law degree. Okay. 5 years into practicing, they lose their law degree because they were caught for drinking and driving, for example. Okay. What is going to happen if the guy who married her in the first place to achieve that vision is an extreme practical? He's going to cut her loose. He's going to say, well, if you can't practice law anymore, that means that you have to go back to school to earn another degree, which is going to cost me money. And it means that I'm not going to achieve my dream home by the time I'm 40, right? It means that you won't be able to have our kids until later. And he's going to say, no, I'm out. Does that make sense? So it's very scary to come across extreme practicals. I've seen extreme practicals before. Does not mean that they're not emotional. It just means that that's not what's driving them towards relationships. And trust me, like personally, I don't know how they don't explode. I just don't know how you can stay in a relationship and for it to be so robotic and so like, oh yeah, let's just achieve our vision and who cares about love? Who cares about intimacy? Who cares about touch? I don't know. Some people, I guess, are programmed that way, but that would suck. I
Yeah,
would
definitely.
explode.
So when I'm thinking of this scale, I feel like, in my opinion, it seems like, women tend to be more emotional and then men would be potentially more practical. Do you find statistically that like a genders align with like a specific side of the scale more often than the other?
Yeah, that's a great question. We do have the data. So emotional analysis by men, practical versus emotional. Okay. From the people who were currently together, and I'm talking men only, almost 50% of them were healthy emotionals.
Hmm.
26% of them were healthy practicals. On the flip side, for women, we had healthy emotionals at 50 and healthy practicals at 18%.
Huh.
So what did I say for men? 35%? Yeah. For women, it was 18%. For extreme emotionals, for women, we have 19%. For men, 11%.
Hmm. Interesting.
Um, for extreme practicals, for the men who are currently together, we have 12%. For women who are currently together, 10%.
Hmm.
So the way we broke it up was currently together or not currently together, because we were trying to understand whether some personality types were more conducive to like longer relationships. Did that answer your question? Ask me more
Yeah.
stats. It's
No,
all
that's
here.
super interesting. Do you have like a specific stat that has like really shocked you or wasn't at all what you expected?
Yeah, yeah. So there's another scale
Hmm.
that I call the critic versus the optimist. The healthy critic will never give 100% because they'll say there's always room for growth. The healthy optimist will say you're exactly where you're meant to be. So it's okay to have 100%. You're beautiful as you are. No need to grow. Don't worry about it. Everything is fine. You're exactly perfect, right? Both are great. Both are great. Now, of course, we have the extremes, right? Extreme critic, you can never meet their standards. They can barely meet their own standards. They're just impossible to please. They cannot stay in long-term relationships. It's impossible for them to commit because they're looking for a unicorn that does not exist. And they expect to also be a unicorn that they will never be. On the other end, we have the extreme optimist. What that means is they are not giving fair scores to their detriment. So for example, if one of my values is dependability and reliability, and my partner happens to cheat, like, and it's his fifth time, and I'm still like, no, it's okay, it's your journey. Yeah, no, I'm not. If I'm giving that person 100%, there's something wrong, right? That's an extreme optimist. You are not being fair to yourself. You're not being fair to the situation, right? As it calls for. Here's where I thought was interesting, and I'm like, no way. So the ones who were currently together, there were it was mostly the healthy optimists and the extreme optimists.
Wow, interesting.
Yeah, so even extreme, but I mean, I guess it makes sense, right?
Hmm.
Because for the extreme optimist, actually, I'm sorry, let's have a look here. So for men who were currently together, the ones who could hold on to the relationship the most were the healthy optimists.
Hmm.
Um, but they still rated high for extreme optimist. Yeah, so that's basically what I thought was interesting, that over forgiveness apparently is good.
I guess it checks out.
It makes sense. That means you're over forgiving. It
Yeah.
means that, yeah.
Hmm. Interesting.
Yeah, it's interesting. I haven't looked at these stats for a second.
That's so fun. Like we've said, I love the stats and the science to back everything up, and it's just so
Hmm.
cool to hear about that and just about all the work that you've put in and the research that you've done. So cool.
Thank you. Thank you so, so much. At the end of the day, I sincerely hope that this helps anyone looking to be in a healthy, committed relationship. I fully understand the joy that comes, to being in a relationship, but at the same time, the detriment and the sadness and the depletion that comes with not choosing a right partner. And just tying it back to spirituality, right? And manifestation. Yes, it's a logical framework, but you're specific with the universe. So, working on this framework, working on yourself, the universe will respond because these are a set of affirmations.
That's beautiful. Thank you so much for sharing this with us. I
Thank you.
yeah, I really really love your advice and I so appreciate the facts to back it up.
Hmm.
Really.
Yeah, and it's such an invaluable topic. Like
Mhm.
this needs to be talked about more.
Mhm.
And this is just such a new perspective to look at love and how you can welcome the relationship that aligns with you into your life. So
Thank you.
thank you
Thank you
so
guys so
much.
much. Thank
Um,
you for being open to it.
of course, yes. So again, thank you. If there's any final thoughts that you want to add that we haven't asked you, please share. And then if you want to share about where the audience can find you, find your book, feel free to share that as well as we finish up here.
Yeah, I'm just gonna speak from my heart right now. Um, Guys, just be careful. Like, your heart is so valuable, and I know how much we want to feel. It's a very human experience, but I think that deep down we're looking for something larger than us and larger than human. And I would just say be careful when you're dealing with love because that's a very powerful emotion. And when you're putting that emotion in the hands of someone who doesn't deserve it, and at the end of the day, it has to be your discernment who you're putting into the hands of, right? Um, yeah, just treat it with care. Treat your heart with care. Like take it from me. Like I said, I'm a bit older, right? But I got to a point where I was doing serious self-harm by going into relationships without any assessment of whether they'll be good for me or not, right? And to that end, I manifested Kevin because I had the 90% in the background of my phone when I met him, you know. So yeah, I think that's all I want to say, just kind of from the heart. Just take it seriously. Treat love with care. And as for the book can be found on the Barnes and Noble website. You can order it online via Amazon as well. And if you live in Orange County, you can find it at the Spectrum Barnes and Noble or Huntington Barnes and Noble, and also Malibu Village and Lido.
But again, thank you so
Awesome.
much. And I hope you have
Thank
a
you guys
wonderful
so
rest of
much.
your
This was
day.
a lot of fun.
All right. So, as per usual, we're going to pull a card and see what the universe has in store for us.
So we are pulling from the Green Witch's Oracle deck yet again, and it is by Erin Murphy Hiscock. This is what it looks like if you're watching on Spotify or YouTube. You can see this beautiful visual, and this is our new favorite deck to pull from. So we pulled the Fog card, and it says obscurity and feeling lost. And it is foggy outside right now. Sometimes, for whatever reason, you can't see clearly. You find it difficult to think through an issue, or you feel lost in a sea of information. You may feel directionless or unable to identify a clear goal or path to a desired outcome. Being lost in fog or feeling foggy can challenge your sense of stability. Fog isn't a solid obstacle. However, it's like a veil, temporarily blurring your surroundings. Just because you can't see clearly doesn't mean the path isn't there. Carefully feel your way forward, one step at a time. Perhaps you need to move in a different direction to reach your destination. Sometimes all it takes is looking at the problem in a new way. The fog card prompts you to practice looking at things from other points of view. As a reflection, you can think about, do you have a problem plaguing you that you could benefit from a different perspective?
That is really good actually, because Zoe had so many good um ways, I mean, the formula itself of
Hmm.
calculating like how to go about relationships and how to go about choosing your partner
Hmm.
and how to go about closing that gap if you do
Hmm.
develop one within the relationship. And I think that at least from my perspective, would make dating so much more clear.
Mm-hmm.
You know, if you do the formula, if you figure out what it is that you value, what it is that you want, then you're not just floating around in the sea of information that is TikTok, you know, in the dating world. And
Mm-hmm.
it's very clear on like, okay, this is what I need, this is what I'm looking for.
Mm-hmm.
And also this is what I need to work on before I can attract that.
Yeah, yeah.
Mhm.
I also love that it talked about perspective, like how can you look at it from a different perspective? Because I think that our perspective can kind of avail things sometimes because
Mhm.
we're seeing it our way, how we've always thought. And instead of like taking that step back and maybe thinking about how we've talked about in the past, like how would source look at this? Or, you know, just because I'm thinking it doesn't mean that that's true. So
Mhm.
I think perspective can be really important. And um, I just, it's interesting that it's like about finding clarity and stuff because, you, like you were saying, if you do this process or, you know, you do the love formula, you just might find more clarity in your love life or in a relationship or, you know, what clarity of what you want. And then you can kind of maybe lift that fog and search, and
Mhm.
it'll be easier to find what you're looking for.
Absolutely. And though this path is covered in fog, or I mean, though this card is covered in fog and trees, there is a path to the light in the end. Yes.
Yes.
I love that, you know.
That's so good.
All right. Well, this has been a lovely episode. I really hope it reaches everyone that it's meant to. Please do share it with your friends, your family, anyone you think it might help. And as always, thank you for helping us raise the frequency.
Bye.
We'll see you in the next episode. Don't forget to like and subscribe and click the bell so you don't miss anything.